All right, this video is called Learning from Last Spring. How do we thrive? So if you call last spring, a lot of kids were pretty excited that school would go remote and that they could be at home and um, not have to come to school, and they thought that was pretty great. Well, we got a big dose of that, right? It went on and on. And it turns out most boys really didn't seem to want to be at home after all. And so we're going to use this as an opportunity to think that through. Like, what's going on? Like, why did you want to stay home? And once you got home, why did you not want to be there for very long? And why did you want to come back to school? What really matters in life and what makes you delight in your life? So we're going to introduce a term you may have heard before, but we're going to introduce it and define it, thriving, right? Which is at the most general level, the best possible total outcome for our life would be thriving. But we're going to talk about thriving as, what most activates us to our fullest, deepest, highest capacities in living that make us want to live even more and delight in the actual doing of our life. Not just enjoying a spike of pleasure, not just enjoying uh, uh, stuff at the end of hard work, but actually enjoying the work and enjoying the tasks of our day and the interactions in our day and taking responsibility for ourselves. So this would be an example of not thriving. You play video games until you absolutely have to study to score well in your classes. You finally turn to your studies, but you do so reluctantly, cutting every corner you can, cramming information into short-term memory, unconcerned whether you retain it or not after the test. Your studying is filled with anxiety, as is your sleep the morning before your test. You get one of the better grades on the test, though, and you feel relief and pleasure at your competitive success. So that'd be an example of having pleasure and success in your life, but not thriving, not really enjoying doing the actual work and the actual learning. Well, let's contrast that with thriving. What does that look like? Well, you have let the subject matter of an academic discipline interest you. You love to attend the class because you love learning the discipline, but also because loving the discipline has helped you love the teacher and other students who help you learn. You join a club related to this discipline. You feel a growing power from learning the discipline and working with others in a creative way. Perhaps you will find a career in this field or a related field. You ask yourself if you have other academic subjects that you might enjoy too if you modified your approach to them. You experience growing control of your life as you are choosing more and more of what you want to do rather than merely reacting to what the system forces you to do. That's an example of thriving. So what are the essential elements of thriving? There's a discipline called positive psychology. It's 35 years old. It's a booming discipline, and it has studied this for decades and come up with some incredibly interesting and well-documented truths that people really value enjoying competence, relatedness, and autonomy in their lives, and that those are three essential elements of a life of thriving, and we'll talk about those more here. So what are competence, relatedness, and autonomy? Well, competence is your skill at doing. So you're competent in science, you're competent in football, and you're competent in making friends, and you're competent in cooking. All the different skills that you have that you can enjoy in the doing. So competence as an essential element of thriving is enjoying that work and that practice as opposed to merely being good at it to get some outcome and then only enjoying the outcome and viewing the work as bogus. Relatedness is the quantity and quality of your friendships and relationships to communities and institutions. So that's the enjoying of giving and receiving care with your friends, not just hanging out with your friends, but actually caring for them, giving and receiving care with your teachers and your coaches and your family and your school. So not just being sort of a passive hanger-outer, but actually enjoying the work of relating to other people. And autonomy is is really taking responsibility for your choices and commitments, really taking grabbing the sense that your life is yours, and not blaming others when things don't go the way that you would like, and really viewing the world as happening by you and your life is happening by you and not merely to you. So there's two kinds of autonomy. There's two kinds of freedom. Often we mean freedom from, which is not having someone else forcing you to do something. It's freedom from coercion. And so when you think what you really want is just to be at home, you're probably thinking of how great freedom from is, because then your day is just like, wow, I just get to do whatever I want. But then there's freedom to. Freedom to is actually having something specific to do. So for instance, you might have freedom from at home, but you don't have freedom to practice basketball with your team. That's at school. You don't have freedom to do a lab. You don't have freedom to produce a newspaper. You don't have freedom to do a lot of things, because that's all at school. So school has lots of freedom too, where you need to want to actually do the work to enjoy it. Home has probably a lot more freedom from for you, for most of us. So here are some examples of each. We've already kind of talked about it, but think of all the subjects that you have in school, all the stuff you do at school. You have competences in those, and the more competence you have, probably the more you enjoy doing that activity. And that's what competence is. That's all the examples of your classes and your sports and all of that, of your skill that you've built up over time in those, and enjoying the work of it. Relatedness is sort of the Russian dolls of your relationships, from your closest friends to your classmates in your grade to your division relationships and your coaches that you relate to and your teachers that you relate to. It's all of those relationships that you have at school. And autonomy would a good example be walking onto campus with a plan, walking onto campus with a sense that I have these responsibilities today that I affirm, and I have these opportunities to create today. This is my life that I get to do, as opposed to walking onto campus and just sort of dreading the assessments that you have for that day, and just reacting always to what the system is making you do. Well, let's return to our paradox. So you wanted to go home. Most boys seem to really relish the idea of being home. And then they got home, and after a while, not that long, they wanted to be back at school. So what's going on with that? Well, think about it. Did your competencies really go up more at home, or would they have gone up more at school had you stayed? Almost certainly they would have gone up more at school. How about your relatedness, like being at home quarantined just with maybe your parents and siblings, compared to all the people you get to interact with at school? Like, wasn't that a problem? Didn't you really want those relationships and be part of the work of giving and receiving care in those relationships? And then your autonomy. Again, it seemed like you'd have more autonomy at home. But when you think about freedom too, that's at school. That's where you actually get to do all this stuff. You get to write. You get to do labs. You get to do math. You get to do sports and all that at a really high level with other people fully engaged. So the paradox is really solved, right? You didn't really understand what thriving was, so you wanted to be home, and then you got home and you wanted to be back at school, because school is where your competence, relatedness, and autonomy is really built, and that's why your parents are sending you to school in the first place. So how can we put this to use, what we learned here? Well, one way to think of it is maybe the boy in you wanted to be at home, right? It's the young man in you that is really realizing the work that is good, right? Boys tend to like to play, and young men and men tend to like work when they're good young men, right? And so We're trying to get you to see that you actually do prefer good work. You actually want to be where your good work of building competences, relationships, and building your autonomy are, and that for you right now is at school. So, takeaways. If you could copy our definition of thriving and then try to put that in your own words so you have it ready. And if somebody asked you what thriving was, you could say. Name and define the three essential elements of thriving. You should be able to do that. Briefly describe the competence you enjoy the most, the relationship you enjoy the most, and the autonomy you enjoy the most in your life right now. Write a journal entry about your experience of being at home instead of at school last spring. What did you miss the most and enjoy the most about being at home? And give as many details as you can in your explanation. And then write a more future-looking journal entry as well. Um, how might you put what you've learned about thriving upon this reflection to use this year at school? Like, if you, now that you see where the meaning in your life really is, how could you have more of it by being more intentional? How can you boost your competence, relatedness, and autonomy this year by choosing to boost them?